$1 trillion. That is what cybercrime is extracting from the global economy. Most CTI programs sitting in the way aren't broken. They're stuck at the wrong level, and they don't have a map to get out. The CTI-CMM is that map. 11 domains, 4 maturity levels, 230 criteria. It is open, free, and community built. And one uncomfortable diagnosis it delivers to most programs is that you are focusing on the wrong things. If you want to know how to measure your CTI program, this is the video for you. The single most important thing the CTI-CMM does is force a question most programs try to avoid. It doesn't ask how many reports you wrote. It asks whether anyone made a different decision because of them. That distinction is the entire game. A team publishing 50 finished intelligence reports a month that nobody actions has a lower maturity than a team publishing just 2 that change what the SOC does the same day they land. The CTI-CMM measures the second number. I'll show you what each maturity level actually looks like in practice, not just on a slide deck. And then we'll walk through all 11 domains and the specific intelligence mission inside each. Then, finally, we'll build a 60-day sprint together that moves your program forward. And we'll close with the language you need when your CISO asks that one question that matters. What is the return on investment here? So, to kick things off, what is the CTI-CMM? Well, it is a community-driven framework, free, on GitHub that you can use today. And it does something most maturity models don't. It measures your program not by what it produces, but by the value it delivers to the people consuming the intelligence. The current version is 1.3, and it defines all of that into 11 domains and one defining philosophical shift. Success is defined by the decision makers consuming the intelligence, not by the analysts producing it. This is the stakeholder first principle, and it changes everything about how you score, build, and defend a CTI program. Now, I've built and assessed CTI programs for years. A mistake I have made multiple times is getting too excited about the shiny, new, cool threat intelligence stuff. Things like dark web monitoring, automation, AI, infrastructure hunting, you name it. Now, these are all great, but it didn't move the needle for the company. What moved the needle was showing the CISO our threat model, what we could and couldn't defend against, how we could close that gap, and how intelligence was making tangible benefits for the business. The CTI-CMM defines 4 stages of maturity. These are not aspirational categories. They describe how your program actually functions on a given day and how you can move up those levels. The first is CTI 0, the pre-foundational stage. This is where practices are not executed. There are no formal processes for handling threat information. Intelligence, well, it exists in tribal knowledge, scattered across analyst inboxes and Slack DMs. The dangerous thing about CTI 0 isn't that you know you're there. It's that most programs operating at that level believe they are a step above. They're at that CTI 1 level because someone just subscribed to a threat feed. So they assume they're at level 1. That next level is CTI 1. That is the foundational stage. This is where most organizational CTI programs actually live. Efforts are reactive, ad hoc, and unplanned. Intelligence is gathered to solve the current incident. The moment that incident closes, the intelligence evaporates. It is never documented, never operationalized, and never fed back into detection and risk posture. The cost of living at CTI 1 shows up in your mean time to detect. When your program lacks a systematic process for tracking adversary behavior across incidents, your defenders discover breaches that have been active for months. Think of this stage as the reactive CTI stage. You only produce CTI when you've been hit. CTI-2 is advanced. A program becomes a program, not just a collection of analyst activity. Processes are documented, procedures are repeatable, and metrics exist. Intelligence requirements have been formalized and are clearly defined for the team to follow. The shift from CTI-1 to CTI-2 is not a capability jump, it is a discipline jump. The single highest return on investment move that most teams can make is to document what they are already doing. That act alone advances the maturity score and helps the capability survive turnover. It allows you to train new analysts, automate existing processes, and ensure reliable output. CTI-3 is leading. This is where intelligence becomes a business function rather than just a security function. Activities are integrated across your enterprise. Recommendations are prescriptive. Not just this IP is malicious, but block this infrastructure, patch this CV on these 3 systems within 72 hours, and brief the mergers and acquisitions team on this threat actor's known interest in our acquisition targets. It is specific and actionable for multiple stakeholders across your enterprise. True CTI-3 is rare. Most programs that self-assess at CTI-3 have achieved documented processes and stakeholder reporting, the objectives of CTI-2. CTI-3 requires your intelligence to be integrated into business decisions outside of your security function. Think mergers and acquisitions doing due diligence, vendor contract risk, product threat modeling, and regulatory strategy. If your intelligence only flows to the SOC and the CISO, you are not at CTI-3. You're a well-run CTI-2, which is genuinely valuable and okay for most teams. But know where you actually stand. The model doesn't punish you for being at CTI-2, it punishes you for pretending you're not. The CTI-CMM doesn't score your program as a monolith. It evaluates it across 11 distinct domains and defines a CTI-specific mission within each one. Your program can be at CTI-2 in incident response, but CTI-0 in third-party risk. That granularity is what makes the model operationally useful and applicable to any CTI program. Asset. Your mission: monitor the attack surface to rapidly detect at-risk assets in your environment. Now, this isn't a configuration management database update task. It's maintaining a living, intelligence-enriched picture of what adversaries are targeted in your sector and matching that against your exposed footprint. Threat. Maintaining knowledge of the threat landscape to reduce risk against new adversaries and exploits. This is the domain most CTI teams treat as their entire job. It is just one of 11 domains in the CTI-CMM. It involves prioritizing CVs against real adversary exploit adoption rates, not CVSS scores. Risk. Align CTI with risk strategies to prioritize reduction efforts and estimate impact. Your threat intelligence should be feeding the enterprise's risk register. If your organization has a risk matrix and your CTI findings don't update it, you have a structural disconnect that's costing the business money. Asset. Proactively inform identity and access management strategies and reduce detection times for identity-related threats. Given that stolen credentials extend dwell time beyond 290 days, your CTI function should brief the identity and access management team on adversary credential harvesting, tactics, techniques, and procedures before an incident happens, not during it. Situation: driven, threat-informed decision-making for all stakeholders based on forecasted threat landscapes. This is where intelligence shifts from reactive to proactive. You're not reporting what happened, you're forecasting what's likely to happen and framing it for decision makers at every level. Response: create an intelligence advantage for your responders and refine your response workflows. During an active incident, CTI's job is to close the information gap for priority intelligence requirements, attributing behavior to known threat actors, servicing relevant TTPs from your knowledge base, and enriching those indicators in near real time so your incident responders can get a jump on the attackers. Third party: monitor, detect, and mitigate incidents posed by vendors and suppliers. Most third-party risk programs are compliance-driven. They assess the vendors once a year using a questionnaire. CTI-informed third-party risk is the continuous monitoring of vendor compromise indicators, dark web exposure, and adversary interest in your supply chain. Fraud: identify and share findings on digital scams and abuse tactics. Depending on your sector, financial services, retail, healthcare, this domain may be among your highest priorities. Things like brand impersonation, business email compromise infrastructure, dark web fraud as a service offerings generate a CTI relevant signal that the fraud team needs. Workforce: support hardening of the human element through threat insights. Translate adversary social engineering tradecraft into targeted awareness campaigns, not just generic phishing simulations from templates that are 3 or 5 years old. Architecture: provide insights into threats targeting the organization's structural state. When your architecture team is evaluating zero trust segmentation or a cloud migration, CTI should contribute the adversary perspective, identifying which threat actors are actively exploiting gaps in the proposed architecture and the potential vulnerabilities that your patch management team will need to be on top of. Program: deliver tailored intelligence to inform governance and strategic resource allocation. This is the boardroom domain. CTI quantifying residual risk is the language of expected financial loss. CTI justifying security investment by mapping it to adversary capability, not regulatory checkboxes. 5 of these 11 domains describe stakeholders most CTI teams have never even spoken to. Look at your last quarter of intelligence outputs. Now look at this list: architecture, workforce, fraud, third party, and program. If your report never reached the architecture review board, the security awareness lead, the fraud team, the procurement function, or the risk committee, those domains aren't underperforming. They don't even exist in your program. That is a coverage question, and it's one the radar chart in the CTI-CMM can answer in less than 90 seconds. 11 domains, 4 levels. The obvious question is how you actually run the assessment and build the roadmap to a mature state. The answer is a structured 60-day sprint. The CTI-CMM operationalization methodology breaks implementation into 3 phases across 60 days. This is a deliberate constraint, short enough to maintain momentum, but long enough to generate defensible evidence of a maturity change that you can present to your manager or executives. Phase 1 is preparation, days 1 to 20. Start with stakeholder interviews. Schedule 5 to 7 conversations with internal customers, your SOC lead, risk manager, CISO, ideally a finance representative, someone from legal, or compliance. Your agenda is specific. What decisions are they making with insufficient intelligence? What assets do they care about most? Where do they feel blindsided? What are their pain points? This step is uncomfortable for many CTI teams. It requires you admitting that you don't know what your stakeholders need. Do it anyway. The interviews are the difference between a maturity assessment that reflects your perception of your program and one that stakeholders actually receive. Once this is complete, you can start prioritizing the domains that actually matter to your stakeholders. Most teams starting a sprint should anchor on threat and response. These have the most immediate operational impact and the fastest path to demonstrable return on investment. You can then layer risk and situation as secondary priorities if any board level reporting responsibility is a requirement of your team. But remember, you need to make these prioritizations specific to your organization. Not every program will care about the same domains, so make sure you align it with your business objectives. Phase 2 is assessment, days 21 to 40. The assessment engine contains approximately 230 evaluation statements distributed across those 11 domains. For each statement, you rate your current score 0 to 3, matching the maturity levels. You also set a target score for the next 6 to 12 months. The model's real power lives in 3 planning mode fields that most teams tend to skip when using the CTI-CMM. First, we have evidence, not what we think we are doing, but show me what we're actually doing. Show me the runbook, the documentation, the processes your team follows. Show me the SLAs. Show me the ticket. If you can't point to evidence, the capability doesn't exist at an accessible level. This field alone destroys comfortable self-assessments. Next, we have the target score. Where do you want to be in 6 to 12 months? You need to be honest here. What is achievable with your current headcount and tooling? If a maturity level is not achievable with the current headcount and tooling, then you might be asking for investment in the future. Next, we have impact versus effort, a calculated priority field. High impact, low effort items surface as your first sprint targets. You are not trying to reach CTI 3 in 60 days, you are trying to close the most valuable gaps with the least friction. Pick off that low-hanging fruit. Here's where phase 2 quietly fails for some teams. Teams will complete the 230 criterion self-assessment, get a score, and then jump to phase 3. They skip stakeholder validation. They don't share the results back with the same people they interviewed in phase 1 and ask, does this match the value you actually experience receiving from us? The validation conversation is uncomfortable. Run it anyway. Phase 3 is deployment, days 41 to 60. Process formalization is the highest leverage move in phase 3. This shift from CTI 1 to CTI 2 is fundamentally a documentation problem. If your team performs a repeatable enrichment process, but that process exists only in one analyst's memory, you are at CTI 1 regardless of how well it actually works. Document it. Write the runbook down. That act alone advances your score and makes the capability resilient to turnover. So what are some of the goals you can aim for in phase 3? Well, you want to define your SLAs for intelligence enrichment. Say every critical incident ticket receives a CTI enrichment, TTP mapping, attribution assessment, related indicator context, within 30 minutes of triage escalation. Write that down, measure it and report on it. That's a CTI 2 response practice. Another one could be integrating threat feeds aligned with your business requirements. Not every available OSINT source is a requirement. Feed selection should be driven by your phase 1 stakeholder outputs. If your stakeholders told you the primary concern is ransomware targeting healthcare infrastructure, your feed prioritization must reflect that. Generic feed consumption is a CTI 1 behavior, regardless of how many feeds you are subscribed to. 60 days from now, you have a documented baseline, a prioritized roadmap, and measurable changes in your highest impact domains. Remember, these are specific to you. But here's what the sprint won't do for you on its own. It won't give you the language to defend your CTI investment in a budget meeting with your CISO or Chief Financial Officer. For that, you need to speak a completely different dialect from what you've been using with your team. Every mature CTI program needs to quantify its contribution to the return on security investment. Not because the CISO doubts you, because the Chief Financial Officer, the board, and the CEO need to make budget decisions in the language of financial exposure, and your job is to give them the numbers that they can use for those decisions. The core model here is annualized loss expectancy, which is equal to the single loss expectancy, the expected financial cost of one breach event, multiplied by the annualized rate of occurrences, the probability of that breach happening in any given year. A mature CTI program reduces both of those variables. It reduces probability through proactive threat-informed hardening, and it reduces impact through faster detection and more targeted response. The Gordon-Loeb rule from information security economics establishes that organizations can mathematically justify spending up to 37% of an asset's expected loss to protect it. This is your upper bound for the investment case. A critical system facing a realistic 10 million breach exposure economically defends a security investment up to 3.7 million in that asset's protection stack. Every technical fact you produce needs a $ and a time frame before it reaches an executive. You might say, we identified new C2 infrastructure for APT Group X. You need to translate this into, we identified attacker pre-positioning. That, if unaddressed, creates a 4.8 million exposure in our manufacturing segment. You might say, our threat domain score moved from CTI 1 to CTI 2. Translate that to, we now have a documented SLA governed intelligence processes that reduce average detection time by an estimated 30 days, which translates to an estimated 800,000 reduction in expected breach costs per incident against our current risk profile. A final example. You could say, we track this threat actor. What you should be saying to your executives is, we have continuous coverage on the 3 threat actor clusters most active against organizations in our sector and in our revenue band, and we're updating the risk register accordingly to keep up with these threats. The CTI-CMM gives you a maturity diagnosis, a roadmap, 11 domains, 4 levels, 230 criteria, a 60-day sprint to baseline, prioritize, and deploy. Run it properly, you close the gap between your self-assessment and what stakeholders actually experience. Plus, you end up with something genuinely valuable for the future of your CTI program. Once your program reaches CTI 2 in response and threat, the next frontier is operationalizing that intelligence into your detection pipeline. In this video, we cover how to translate structured intelligence outputs from a CTI 2 program directly into your systematic detection pipeline. I'm Adam, this is Craven Security, and for more cyber threat intelligence content, make sure you're subscribed. I'll see you in the next one.